webinars for us, who is going to briefly share why JCI Sandton decided to look into the Agenda 2063 and what is the ultimate goal that we are hoping to achieve by hosting these sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar, The Africa We Want from JCI Sandton. Thank you.
Okay, can I please ask the host to allow my video? Okay. There we go. Okay. Hello, Africa. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Mlamuli Mbambo, as my esteemed local president Simpiwe has shared. So the reason we looked into starting with Agenda 2063 is that in Africa, most times we have amazing policies, you know, we have great policies that really capture what we would like to see and what we would like to happen. The problem is in the execution and the implementation of said policies. And with this, we decided that seeing that Africa has a youth bulge, it makes a lot of sense to get the young people involved in striving and marching towards Agenda 2063. But for that to happen, you kind of need to ensure that the young people actually know about Agenda 2063. And we felt that there is not enough communication happening that actually addresses young people knowing what Agenda 2063 is, knowing the aspirations, therefore being activated to intentionally and authentically fight or strive for that to happen. And another thing that we have seen as young active citizens is a lot of things in Africa are kind of left to the senior generation. And it's as if they will do that for the youth. And what we want to instill is working with the youth. We want to be part of that change. And we think that there are many active, many energetic, smart, creative young people that could add a lot in making sure that we achieve Agenda 2063. So feel free to please interact, please send videos, participate in the polls, because we want to collate the real voice of African youth and share that with Pan-African organizations like the AU, SADC, etc., so that they have a much better idea of what young active citizens across Africa are thinking. And in as much as we're planning to do this as a live event on Africa Day, we find that this has sort of been a blessing in disguise, in that now we can actually incorporate and get the whole continent involved because we have moved online. So yes, that's the essence of why we are doing this this webinar series and facilitating Agenda 2063. Yeah, thank you. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, who is next, Madam Local President?
Thank you very much, La, for the introduction, and thank you, EVP. We will now go forward to the actual discussion that we are having tonight. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator, the esteemed Ms. Pearl Maphumulo. Always a pleasure to have you on board with Anything Africa. Wherever Africa meets, I always find Pearl there. Very appropriate for today's conversation. Madame Pearl, who is the Managing Director of Business Development Agency and also the head of Africa 80. a young person who's really a mover and shaker in our continent, very passionate about the continent, and we are looking forward to hearing from you and the team, ma'am. So you may please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simpiwe and Mlamuli, who spoke before. That was really inspiring speech that you just made now. I think I've already been introduced, so I will not go ahead and speak any more about myself. But I will, perhaps maybe start with some house rules for those that recently joined us now, because I see there's people still joining. So first of all, because I know that we all are able to unmute ourselves, so if we could just please keep our mics muted. If you do want to ask a question closer to the end of the discussion, if you can just raise your hand. Alternatively, there's a chat box right at the bottom where you can just simply type your question or any question that you have, and I will attend to it. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to do maybe 2 or 3 rounds of questions to the 3 panelists that we have here tonight, and then I will allow the audience, who this is for anyways, to then ask some questions to the panelists. So first up, we have Jordan Seke, who is an author and the 2020 JCI Stanton board member and public relations director, joining us this evening. Right after him, we have Wanjuhi Njoroge. Please do excuse me in advance if I do misspell or mispronounce rather your name. So Wanjuhi is the founder and the president of People Planet Africa. She's also a global shaper from East Africa. Nice to meet you. And then we have Inga Matlingwane, who is a candidate attorney at ENS Africa. She's also the founder of Chronically Curious Club. Now, before we get into the panelists basically telling us about some of the work that they do, because I believe they would do much more justice than I would ever do, I'm going to quote Simpiwe, one of your JCI members, right? Njamo Dahiru, who says that the Africa I want is a continent where youths will seize the available opportunities to freely use and express their talents to build strong and prosperous nations. Now, by way of introduction, I would like the panelists, starting with you, Jordan, to tell us a bit about the work that you do, and then also just briefly, just to start us up, tell us what the Africa you want looks like. Jordan, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank to everyone who is joining us to this evening on the Zoom platform. The unprecedented time of our life is allowing us to be online all the time. So the Africa that I want is the more inclusive Africa. You will agree with me that the overarching principle of the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, adopted back by global leaders in 2015, has only one core in this principle, is to do not leave anyone behind. Having said that, the Africa that we want is the more inclusive continent where no child, no woman, no man should be excluded or left behind on the basis of the gender, their ethnic affiliation, their political affiliation, their age, their localities, and their beliefs, or some sort of things, as well as their other factors that may put them aside. We want a continent where young people, irrespective of their belief, are included in every decision-making process. That being in economic, in development, in social, environmental part, everywhere we must be involved. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Wanjuhi, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm not able to switch on my video. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be joining you this evening from Nairobi, Kenya. The Africa I want to see is an Africa where there's a conversation between generations. So there's an intergenerational conversation, because I feel there's such a gap. So the median age for most African countries is about 18 years, between 18 and 20. But look at our leadership, and it will tell you that majority are very, very old presidents. And there seems to be a disconnect between what the leadership is prioritizing in and what the young people really, who are the majority. 70% of Kenya's population, according to last year's population census, showed that it was young people. But when you look at the priorities of the current government, they are not in line with those of the young people. So my desired Africa, or the Kenya and Africa that I want to see, is a really inclusive Africa, one that we are speaking to one another, because there is no them without us and there is no us without them. So we need to learn from them, but they also need to allow us to join this conversation so that they can know, what does the future look like? What do we need, we as a majority of Africans? And my heart is bleeding right now when I look at COVID-19 and the effects. You know, COVID-19 has exposed glaring gaps in terms of leadership, in terms of development. There are countries with no ventilator machine. There are those with just 3 ventilator machines. My country has 100, yet you're about 50 million. So if 1 million of us were to contract COVID-19, how would they handle the situation? So I think there is a glaring gap. Yeah, the generations are not speaking to each other, and we need intergenerational dialogues. We need mentorship from the leaders who are there now, and they also need to listen to us. So that's the kind of Africa that I foresee, and my heart desires to see many African young people taking up leadership as well.
Fantastic. Inga?
Good evening, everyone. The Africa that I want is one that is full of disruptors. I want an Africa where young people are given the space, are given the platform to actually reimagine the entire world and how they want to go about in achieving their generational mandate. That's the Africa I want. I think this evening, it's going to be a recurring theme where we talk about an inclusive approach, where we talk about an intersectional approach in achieving the Africa we want as a youth. So in essence, I just want an Africa where the youth are given a platform to just reimagine so that we can take action and take our calls and our mandate and execute that appropriately and according to what we want as the youth.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those, for sharing that, panelists. Again, I would like to welcome everybody that just joined. I see there's more people that have joined the conversation. Do keep your mics muted. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, or visit the chat box right at the bottom to type your question if you feel more comfortable to do that, and I will attend to it. Now, across the 3 speakers or the panelists, speaking about the Africa that you guys want, there's one, recurring word that I keep hearing: inclusivity. You want an inclusive, Africa where youth is concerned. And I believe, Jordan, you spoke about how you would want even women, included in, in certain decision-making processes, etc. Part of the Agenda 2063, there's a point that speaks about women, in fact, that says that, empowering women so that they play a role in all spheres of life and leadership, etc. COVID-19 has exposed, like Wanjuhi just said, a lot of illnesses, rather, for lack of a better word. There's been a lot of reports around gender-based violence during this time. And so, I'm just curious, what do you believe? And Jordan, this question you could first answer this, this question for us from a male perspective. What do you believe could be done by current leadership in addressing such challenges that are obviously pulling women back in them taking over these leadership positions in the different spheres of life?
Thank you very much, Per. And I'm even ashamed to be speaking here, representing all the men who have been violent toward women in the past. And I remember reading on the news, one guy quoting, I said, every country in the world, people do drink alcohol. But why in South Africa, after drinking alcohol, when the person becomes drunk, the first person that he went to target is a woman? It's quite a pity. And there is no excuse about that. And I'm not speaking here to apologize on their behalf, basically. I want to be clear because as young active leader, we have the mandate to speak out, to speak up, and to call each and every cat by his name. It's quite a very shameful decision or behavior altogether. But what can be done? The leadership have failed. That is something that we have to admit, all of us. There have been women and men included in this country and elsewhere in the world where gender-based violence has been witnessed. What we have to do is to return to the basis. The basis is to know the right of each and every person in our society. We have rights, we have duties. We have to respect the space given by each and every citizen on our landmark. So what the government have to do, speaking for them on their behalf now, after apologizing to all women that have been victims of this nonsensical behavior, is to put strong measure where people have to face the magnitude of the law whenever they've been accused of violating or beating up and, those such horrible behavior must be facing the law. And I think I'm glad that we have Inga in the panel, who is a lawyer, and she will bring some legal perspective in that particular view. But as a business person, as a leader, I've been concerned, and I think that is a big problem that we have in Africa. All over Africa, the legislator have failed us. They've failed us in such a way that people always find the way out whenever they do something that is against the law. There is people pay bail and get out of their crime, and that is quite a pity.
While still on the same point, Wanjuhi, in Kenya, have you been experiencing, the same type of issues, with regards to gender-based violence over there? And what do you believe could be our role as young people to assist, in curbing this gender-based violence issues or challenges that we face as not just South Africa, but as a continent and the world?
Yes, it is quite unfortunate that we are facing an increased cases of domestic violence and sexual harassment as well. Unfortunately, we have a dawn to dusk curfew, so men and women have to be locked down in there's no going out. But to have a lasting solution, I have worked with primary schools, and I think we need to start having the conversation of gender equality with both men and women at a very tender age. So this is a conversation that has to start from homes. And I remember once we went for a mentorship. So we target schools in rural areas, and I remember once we went to a school for mentorship, and the girls could not look at us in the eyes. They used to drop out in primary school, get married to the motorbike operators because that was cool then. A woman in the rural areas is only meant to get married, bear children. The husband is the one determining the number of children that the women will bear. And when a woman starts being outspoken or starts rising, that becomes a threat. That's unconventional, But then I feel that we need to have men in the conversation as well. We cannot continue, we as feminists, we as gender activists cannot continue talking to ourselves. We need to include men in this conversation. It's extremely, extremely important. I also feel that having this conversation in expensive hotels is not working. I'm very passionate about women leadership, but who are the people that vote? the voters are not in these expensive hotels. Majority of them are in estates and villages. Are we having this conversation with them? Secondly, Kenya has been trying to pass a rule that we call the 2/3 gender rule, where we see the increased participation of women in parliament and other leadership positions, but that hasn't passed because the men in parliament are feeling threatened and they don't want it to pass. They still don't see it as an important agenda to pursue, never mind that women in Kenya are 50% are more than 50% of the population. But for this to become an important role, I also feel that we as women need to take a united stand and say, we are going to advocate for what is rightfully ours. When it comes to leadership, if the people that we are sending to parliament are not going to pass laws that are favorable to us, then we're not going to allow them. Secondly, we need a lot of civic education. Extreme civic education is extremely important, because you find that a child is raped or molested in their estate, and that is solved out of court. Yet there is a law in Kenya that was passed in 2006 that allows for life imprisonment for people who defile children for rape cases. But you find that they want to solve this at home. But we need to have civic education that is really intense and focused towards educating the citizenry on what to do in cases of domestic violence and sexual harassment. Third, I would want to speak about media. I feel that media is very, very biased. And they're reporting, I look at how they report a woman, a parliamentarian, for instance, who's done something wrong. They are very, very unfair and they target them. But and I'm not justifying wrongdoing, but you find a male politician has done something wrong, has harassed a staff, or is attacking the wife, is beating the wife, but that doesn't even get any media attention, So can we have media friendly, can we teach our media on how to be more friendly to women? And finally, I would want to talk about our schools as well. What are teachers teaching the children? It's extremely, extremely important that we have gender sensitive and gender equality classes introduced in school, in our curriculums. And I feel that we have to lay the foundation at a very early age, and it's extremely, extremely important that we make this part of our curriculum, because children are growing up knowing that a woman's place is in the kitchen. Well, that has really changed. A woman has no voice. It is what the husband says. A woman is a weakling. Well, in reality, there's no difference between a man and a woman, just the biological functions that are different, but everything else is the same. What a man can do, a woman can do better. But this needs to be an everyday, we need to be reminded as often as possible. But I think I'm going to end by saying the women also in parliament, the women who go to parliament, it's extremely important that they too become good representations. And a good example is the women in Rwanda. Rwanda is one country where we have more women representation in parliament, but because those women are good examples, when they go to parliament, they advocate for the people's rights, and we have more women representation as well. So I feel it's extremely important to have this conversation at the grassroots. We cannot continue speaking to ourselves. We need male champions. We need this incorporated into our curriculums, and even in churches and mosques as well. We need to also target the religious leaders as well.
Fantastic. Inga, from a legal perspective, how do you believe that, or rather, what are some of the things within the legal space that you believe leadership could re-look at in assisting or bettering, rather, the gender-based violence situations that we see?
All right. Thanks. I think for far too long, we've sat in forums, we've sat in rooms where we're having discussions about dissecting patriarchy and how that system has affected and adversely affected women at large. I think that the notion of, educational programs, trying to get the message across, trying to inform everybody of gender-based violence and how it occurs, and trying to dissect that as well, is something that has been happening in South Africa for quite some time. I think year after year, Africa, we have protests, we have, you know, awareness programs to try and to highlight this scourge in society. And I remember last year we had a march where we wanted the JSE to essentially fund activists, to fund GBV organizations with respect to counseling, with respect to, you know, taking the matter forward. But what came out of those discussions was the National Plan for Gender-Based Violence. And so what that sought was to have various stakeholders, including the government, to sit down and to look at policies and see how we could redraft policies, which policies needed to be amended in order to effectively respond to GBV. So the last time I checked, these policies were currently sitting with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. And this is a body of work in which activists from various organizations around South Africa came forward to contribute to. And so the current legislation, the current policies in place are currently sitting with the Department of Constitutional Development and Justice. And so as a country, we await for these policies to be given the green light in order for people to know how to effectively respond to GBV. And that's just from a legal framework, right? But I think what I take comfort in is the fact that activists are doing the necessary work in South Africa. I think from our point of view, activists, organizations need to be supported. I look at public interest litigation organizations that take these matters to court, that take in survivors of GBV, right? I think those are the people that need to be funded and need to be effectively supported. But I think everything else in terms of GBV lies with redrafting policies. And until those policies are given the green light, people are almost stuck as to how do I go about reporting this matter? How do I seek help? What happens when I get to the police station? Who assists me? From a court perspective, who can help me if I cannot afford legal fees in this regard, right? These are kind of conversations that are happening in the legal fraternity. And these are conversations that everybody needs to be a part of, because I believe that if people know their rights when it comes to GBV, they know how to effectively respond and they know how to seek help. And so from a legal perspective, the one thing that has been happening in South Africa was with respect to the national plan in terms of GBV. And right now, the policies sit with the Department of Constitutional Development.
Well, okay. Thank you very much for those contributions. I'm actually taken aback just thinking about some of the the things that is being shared here, and some reports that I've been reading also during this week, and people that I know as well that have been going through gender-based violence type situations, and so for me it would have been completely unfair not to have brought this up in this conversation. And of course Aspiration 6 does also make mention of women. I'm also a big believer of collaboration, which is, partly, not even partly, it is entirely the reason why I formed the nonprofit, the Africa 80, back in 2015. And so I've sat in different, platforms where, a comment that has been reoccurring has been, bothering me at every single time from current leaders who would say that young Africans are not as great at mobilizing themselves and collaborating. If they are indeed, since we are indeed the majority in terms of populations on this continent, if we were to work together and collaborate, we would even be able to make much more of an influence in terms of policy or the leadership that would be coming into seats of power. I just want to ask, maybe I could take this to Wanjuhi. How do you, what would be the recommendations or suggestions of ways in which Africans, young Africans from different countries could organize themselves and work together towards a common cause?
Thank you very much, Paul. And before I answer your question, allow me to also add something that I had forgotten on women. The reason as to why women stay in abusive relationships is because they're not financially empowered. So if I don't have money and I have children, how will I leave my husband who is abusive? I'll stay with him and I will say that I'm staying because of my children. So we have to ensure that our women are economically empowered. That way they can be able to walk away from abusive relationships, from abusive partners, and still stand on their own 2 feet. Now, to answer your question on collaboration, I'm very, very passionate about collaboration because I believe we have a Swahili saying that says, kidole kimoja hakiui chawa. One finger does not kill lice, you know, the one that comes to your hair. And I feel that there's a lot of competition among young people and it's unnecessary. I want to take all the glory, and this is the honest truth, and we need to start being honest with each other. And I've been thinking about political leadership of young people because I have been very, very frustrated and angry. I think I'm now coming out of the anger to accepting that this is a situation that Africa is in, especially during this COVID-19. I look at my country and the priorities are very different. We want to expand the executive, we want to extend the term limits. And it's the same in neighboring countries. There are countries that are saying there's no COVID-19, yet people are dying because they don't want to call off the elections. And so we have to be burdened enough to say, enough is enough. We need to get into political leadership. When you look at political parties, the existing political parties will never allow us to get in and give us power on a silver platter. So we'll either have to create our own political parties, and for us to do that, we'll have to lose self and say, I'm losing self for the common good. Secondly, it's either we go into the existing parties, like the South African party that I really, really love, the ruling party, and because it has its ills, yes, I agree, but then it's one party whose structures, if the people in leadership were to move, it would be a party that would be more inclusive because it has a youth wing as well. That is something that we don't have in our country. But it's either we go in and disrupt the existing ones or create our own. And for us to do that, we need to come together. We need power. There's power in numbers. We need to come together in terms of fundraising. We need to come together in terms of mobilizing other young people to join. We need to be good examples to show that we can actually lose self for the sake of our country, for the sake of our continent. I used to love Agenda 2063, but I want to surprise you and tell you that Agenda 2063, they put it as at 2063 because those who created it will not be there, they'll have died. A good example is silencing the guns. It was, there's whatever movement or was created in 2013, towards the end of 2013. And we were meant to silence the guns by 2020. We are in 2020. This is a theme for Africa Union 2020. How many guns have we silenced? We are not even addressing the real problems in the region. How we have access to cheap guns? Where are they coming in? Who is behind this? You get. There is huge unemployment among young people. And these young people are the ones being recruited to go and fight in the Taliban. And these are honest conversations that we're not having. So we continue to have meetings. Like I think Africa Union exists to hold conferences in very, very expensive hotels and fly business. And to be honest, I don't think we're going to solve anything. So unless we as young people decide, me as Wanjohi, you as Paul, Jordan, and Inga, we decide that we are moving away from self for the common goal and come together, because the honest truth is that the people who created Agenda 2063, this continent is not theirs. They don't care about Agenda 2063. 2063 agenda is to keep them busy and to show that they're doing something. Yet you and I know they don't really care about this continent. It's about making money. So it's unless we lose self and say we're coming together and working together, collaborating. Yes, this is our continent. These are our problems. But if we came together, my skills are A, B, C, and D. Paul, your skills are A, B, C, and D. Can we bring them together and find a solution? Then I believe we can move forward. But until then, I think Africa has a long way to go. And I used to be very naive to believe that we can achieve the Africa we want to show. I think that bubble of naiveness has been busted.
As you're speaking, I'm actually looking at Jordan's face. He's been smiling throughout and nodding. What are your thoughts?
I concur with her on several points, because if you look at the Africa, the one that we're currently living in, we are led by dictators. And as said earlier on, the legislators have been failing on us. And thanks, Inga, for bringing up what is currently happening in the judiciary industry of South Africa, where some law still sitting on parliament on someone's desk. It's quite a pity. And like, I will also add on saying that the African Union is just a group of people who call themselves leaders for doing nothing for us, but who travel business class every time, meeting in a very expensive hotel to draft agenda that doesn't even speak loud enough to address our problem. As I said earlier on, the Africa that we want must be very inclusive. You will see in Africa, even people have been excluded or left beyond just based on their political affiliation. And it's a pity. How can we call or claim to be democratic when we are not tolerant to each other? We don't accept easily criticism from other people. Every person who comes against our position must be killed. That is the Africa that we're currently living in. And the Africa that we want is the Africa of freedom, the Africa of gender equality, the Africa where young people have a platform to voice out their concern. And I'm grateful because JCI is allowing us to have this conversation. And this is a serious conversation to speak, guys. We must not take this one lightly because it concerns us. It concerns our future. If we want to build our future, we have to stand up as one single person to voice out our concern. Who sit in those meetings? Who are the young people who were at the establishment of this Agenda 2063? We don't know them. And some of them are already dead. Some of them are in exile. That is the reality of life that we live in Africa. But how can we come out of this problem? As she mentioned, we have to bring on the very same table the skill set each and everyone has and see how we can integrate them to build the continent that we want. You will see, if it will cost you more money to travel within Africa than for you to go to another continent. What are we doing for the regional integration? Nothing. The African Union, I hope that when Madagascar came with the COVID organic, African Union could have voiced out their support and everything. They keep quiet. No one. But when the Black Lives Matter in the US, African Union was able to make a statement. And I'm not denying the demise of Floyd, but we also have problem in Africa. If our leaders are not concerned, who on earth will address our concern, our problem, our issue? So they want to be on scene on TV for them to show support, but they are not supporting our own action in Africa. I will take you back to a few years ago with Charlie Hebdo in France. A lot of French-speaking presidents, all of them traveled to France. They were at the front line in support of the Charlie Hebdo. But now the consequences. When people are dying at the east center part of DRC, when there are people being massacred everywhere in Africa, nobody to stand to say that I'm DRC or I'm Goma or I'm this one. And it's quite a pity, but I don't know, what are we representing today? And how are we going to take these voices forward? And I think this event is just one step ahead of what we have to build. We must not stop here. We must engage. We must create a very good group of people with bright idea to speak out and address our concern. Thank you.
So in 2015, a quote or rather advice that was given to myself and a group of other young Africans before we co-authored a book together was you can achieve almost anything as long as you don't care who gets the credit. Anjuhi spoke about young people wanting the glory. Jordan speaks about the current leadership wanting to be in the front line, but not doing any work pretty much. Inga, how can we get young people? This is a beautiful platform. There's a lot of young people that are tuning in this evening, and those that will also watch this, this webinar after we are done. How can young people, how do we get young people to deny self, as how Anjuhi was saying, and focus on a common goal, and not focus on you're from, you know, a different country, you know, as you know, from me, I'm from South Africa, so you do your thing, I do my thing. But how can we bring young people together? What do you think could potentially be something that after this webinar, young people can go back to and think about and say, maybe this is a way that I could, you know, try and get young people together to move forward for a common goal? How do you think, how do you best believe, you know, could, you know, that could be achieved?
Right. So I think this has already been touched on. The idea of moral citizenship, where we are all as young people acting collectively and collaborating on various projects, right? I think it then lies in our efforts to try and create a more just society, a more equal society, a society that's reflective of us and our aspirations. So at the core of everything as the youth, I think collaborating is it, right? I sometimes think it becomes a burden of us as the youth because we often have to drive accountability, right? But I think that if we're able to keep each other accountable as a youth in terms of achieving our goals and aspirations, we're nearly there, right? I think the starting point is us just on this platform having brave enough conversations, right? Engaging as the youth. And I think I've seen the youth become disruptors in so many aspects, right? And what comes to mind when I think about the youth being disruptors here in South Africa, most specifically, I think of the Rhodes Must Fall activism at UCT. I think of the Fees Must Fall movement, right? I think these movements were all coordinated by us, the youth at universities at the time. And we had a mandate to say that make tertiary institutions accessible, right? And I think it became a movement that everyone from every part of the continent could resonate with, right? In trying to get access to education. So I've seen various stances that where the youth have collaborated, right, and collectively come together for one just mandate. So if we continue with that trajectory, I think we have an upper hand in doing that, but we need to keep each other accountable. And as already mentioned, it shouldn't matter who gets the credit, right? After those movements had happened in South Africa, we saw various student leaders who were at the forefront of those movements getting into parliamentary positions, right? And for us, that was a win, right? But I think it was the people, ordinary students on the ground who had the momentum, who kept on pushing day and night for these rights to be recognized, for the awareness of both these Rhodes Must Fall campaigns and these Fees Must Fall campaigns. So I think that was pivotal. At the end of the day, having people to represent us in parliament was a win. So it just takes collaborative effort to get there.
Now in Africa, technology or access to even, you know, the internet is a big problem. So maybe Jordan, let me just direct that question to you. Could you share with us some of the proposed solutions to use technology to achieve this collaboration or this inclusive Africa?
Thank you, Pearl. And before I give some solution, let me try to lay down the foundation on the challenges, because maybe some people are not aware of the challenges that we are facing as Africa. Because the continent is being watched as the next big market. And that description has persisted for a while now. The challenge that we are facing is because we are living in the continent of inequality. From north to south, east to west, we are living in very unequal society where the distribution of income are not done fairly. And in 2018, about 640 million Africans did not have access to electricity. So those numbers are quite shocking. And when you look at technology, and people will be maybe questioning me about the fourth industrial revolution. It's just a buzzword, the fourth industrial revolution. Please, guys, forget about it. Because one of the attributes of the fourth industrial revolution is to create the difference between the richer and the poor. So the rich people will still become richer, and the poor will go down the scale. And there is a common saying in South Africa that we talk about the black middle class. There is no such thing. It's just a lot of young people graduated with gown and their degree in their pocket, but they're walking around here with a lot of debt because some of them went to the bank to get the loan for them to study. At the end, hoping that at the end of the day, they will be funding a job. But unfortunately, that is not the case. And I hear Inga mentioning about the higher state of unemployment. Those are the challenges that we are facing. But for me, the solution, however, is to build an Africa technology ecosystem that will drive inclusive growth. How? Is about bringing the private and the public sector together to build capacity in capital of infrastructure. Because if we don't have infrastructure, we are not able to move forward. Yes, people who have numbers will also come with another claim, saying that, yes, in Africa, we have about 643 tech hubs. But here, the truth, 41% of those tech hubs are incubator facilities. 24 are the innovators, and 14 are just accelerators. We don't have infrastructure in place to build on. So we are facing with the problem of IPs. Africa is more a consumer and importer of technology. We can claim whatever we're saying that MTN is doing a great job, and as well as Ericsson to launch the 5G. But hear you me out, Ericsson, is it an African company? No. What are we doing? Nothing. So the solution is for us to come together in building an African technology ecosystem that drives inclusive growth. How are we going to do that? In each and every sub-regional part of Africa, we have to create the legislator to sit, because if you look, the reality of people in the South are different from the people at the East. They are different from the people in the North. So we have to create those sub-regional entities to build governance, because plan without governance is set to fail. So we have to create those governance. And then when all those sub-regional entities meet together, they will be meeting under the umbrella of the African Union, so that we will see to leverage what this part is lacking. What can we do to bring those capacity or capability to that part of Africa? And that is how we can move on. So we have to invest. Those investments must go to the road, to the port, to the network and telecommunication facilities, to education, guys. To education, so that people, when they build their own apps, they can make money out of it. They can train to get their pattern out of those solutions built. As I said to you, we count up to February 2020, we had 643 tech hubs in Africa, in the entire Africa. And guess what? Who are they leading? South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. What about other countries? You will question me about that, because they are sleeping. they are not angry to see the development of this continent coming on their eye. So that was my input.
Fantastic. Wanjihu, do you have any additions to what Jordan has spoken, proposed solutions to use technology to achieve an inclusive Africa?
So I wish I could share. We about 2 years ago had a digital literacy training in my village. My village is just 2 hours out of Nairobi, which is the main city. And we would carry our laptops. And when we went there, a child could not lift the lid of the laptop. 70% of Africans still reside in rural areas, and they have not been exposed to something as simple as a laptop. They have seen a computer. A child had to draw a computer. So he wasn't able to draw the processor, but he drew the monitor and the mouse and the keyboard, because that is all that he had seen. And I will shock you that we left these kids with a laptop for about 5 minutes, and they had managed to figure how to lift the lid, how to switch it on. What am I trying to say? That the reality is that unless we prioritize research, we prioritize allocating money for innovation in our budgets, in our annual budgets as countries in this continent, I don't think we'll move forward. He talked of the number of innovation hubs in Africa. I will surprise you, the majority of those are not even driven by government. Those are private owned and foreign owned innovation hubs. And who are the owners? These are white people. Even here in Kenya, there is one that is very celebrated that I will not mention, that is owned by a white person. And the honest truth is that unless Africa, and when I started talking about the misalignment between the government priorities and what the needs of the majority of the people in their countries are, and my country is leading. So when this government took power, they said we are introducing laptops for children, every child. In lower primary school, we have a laptop. And I was like, what kind of BS is this? And pardon my French. Because why not set up ICT centers where everybody would benefit? What are laptops for? That project failed, and it was a self-enriching project. And so if Africa, and that is why I said Africa Union for me is a watchdog, and it is also a body that ought to guide African countries, but it has failed on that role. And so this is our role as young people. This is where we come in. And I see the university students, they go home on long holidays. What do you do when you go home? Why not start training the children in your small village, in your small community, how to code using your computers? You can even carry 5 of your friends and host them in your home. I think we need to have a movement of change. And this is the only way we're going to achieve a revolution. And it has to start with you and me. I don't think these governments and these leaders are willing to do anything for us. So it has to start with us. But every time we are called for budget, they call for budget meetings where we input what is going to go into the budget, what money is going to be allocated where. We have a role to play. And when you come to Kenya, we have something we call the KOT, Kenyans on Twitter. We are lethal. We are known to come together and unite against a common enemy and unite towards a common goal, a common good. Why not use the same platform to lobby for more allocation of money to funding ICT literacy, ICT infrastructure as well. Where I come from, we have to climb a tree to access network. But imagine if there was something called infrastructure sharing, because the infrastructure of mobile telephony is quite expensive when you think about the boosters and whatnot. Why not come together as networks? And that can be imposed by government and also given subsidies to allow them to, and incentives to allow them to share infrastructure, to pursue development in these farthest to reach areas. And I think with this, we'll see development, but there has to be a willingness. And I don't see that willingness from the governments that exist in Africa currently. And so it has to be led by young people.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we're 3 minutes away from opening up the questions from those that are in attendance. So perhaps maybe Inga, if you could just also touch on the same question that I've already asked Jordan and Wanjuhi around proposed solutions to use technology for an inclusive Africa. And shortly after that, I will then take questions from the attendees.
Sorry, technological errors. So I have my own challenges when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. And I think it was such a big buzzword in South Africa, if not the most trending. And so I think Jordan was right when he touched on that. And I often think about how exclusive just the way in which information with respect to the fourth industrial revolution has been, right? Only people in certain conferences are given, access to the information as to who will benefit from the fourth industrial revolution, right? Who will have access to it, right? And I often think about Afrotech startups in South Africa and how in all of the contracts that I've worked on, in all of the agreements when it comes to Afrotech startups, the problem is always with respect to one, funding, right? So African entrepreneurs will have explosive ideas, but the problem is always with respect to funding, and two, the IP. So intellectual property is a huge aspect of it, right? And with that regards, I always see that the problem is if people don't have the trademarks, the patents, and all their IP, right? They lose out in all of their ideas. So again, I guess there's a huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots, because a lot of the funders are foreign nationals, right, from the global north, to be more specific. And so I think about how, with respect to the fourth industrial revolution, right, what we've seen is the disparity between the haves and the have-nots in South Africa. And I think COVID has been a big magnifier with respect to this, right? And we look at how schools started panicking when children couldn't, when we all were under restrictions and people didn't have access to studying materials, right? Students were left basically with no choice but to, try and find means to connect, right? Again, this idea of access, where universities had to go back to the drawing board to see how best they could fund students in enabling them to get laptops. But again, if you live in a rural area where reception is a problem, you have network problems, then how useful is all of this to you? So I think COVID has really allowed us to do a lot of introspection in terms of just technology and how accessible we can try and make it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those insights to my panelists. Now I'm just moving over to some of the comments and the rather questions that the attendees have put forth. So the first one is from Brett, who is the founder and director of WIS Scholarship Foundation, who says that they empower children in Kenya with education. And the question is, how can we work with Africa, the Agenda 2063, to help create an Africa where every child gets a great or quality education? Jordan, do you want to take that?
Yeah.
I'm picking on you because I know that you are with a particular academia.
Yes, I'm with the Harvard of Africa, and I'm proud to be representing that institution tonight as well. So I think the problem is not as simple as people may think. We face resistance from different governments, especially because some people, as I mentioned earlier on, who call themselves leaders, are there to become richer. You cannot come and invest in certain country in Africa without you bribing the minister responsible of that portfolio. And that is a pity. And what Juni said, there is no budget allocated toward education to speak. The envelope size of education is quite small, and it differs from country to country. Some countries, the literacy level is below the unacceptable number or rate, if to speak. And the African Union have completely failed us all. So we cannot speak toward bringing them into the conversation for them to lead this conversation. The conversation must start from us, young people, like today, in this platform. What is our next move? That is the question that we have to constantly ask ourselves. What is next from this conversation moving forward? Education is good. You will remember, as Inga mentioned, there is a problem of connectivity in the rural area. If South Africa, the economic powerhouse of the continent, are facing this problem of connectivity in rural area, what about other countries in Africa? The case is quite worse than you can imagine. We must leave our comfort places, our comfort zone. We have to go out there. We have to go on the field to touch and feel the reality, what is happening there. Data is a luxury in some countries in Africa. And Inga forgot to mention data must fall because the cost of data is insane. In the country where I come from, I'm from Congo Brazzaville. I went there for a week. I decided to stop using my phone for internet because the data was ridiculously expensive. And I can imagine, what about other countries where poverty is stay in our stepdoors? But we must not lose sight and we must not lose hope. It's just us folding back our sleeve and get our hand dirty in the mud. We must not come here only to complain. We must come with solution. And here's the solution. The reality of each and every part of Africa is different. The reality are dynamic. They constantly change. Few years ago, even last year, reality is different from this year, especially with the COVID-19 and everything have to be online and all these things. We have to start by empowering people in our community, in our respective community. That is the question that I'm sending out to everyone here. What are you doing in your community? What are you doing to educate the people? What are you doing to empower young people who are desperate, who don't have anything to do for their future? They don't know where the future lies at the end of the day. So the hope, the solution is you and I to start doing something in our community, going out to get the information and feed them with the right information, to send them to school, assist them in the process. That is our, whenever we have powerful community, it's gonna enable that integration in the African landmass, and then we will all be enjoying the quality of education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's a comment that comes from Alex, who says, I personally think that Africa has lost its core values attached and given to a family. Parents have relinquished their duties to educators and teachers, to nannies, as well as the media. And individuals learn to draw boundaries, to say please, to whisper sorry, etc. in a family nest. So Alex is calling out individuals that make up a family, that in turn make up the society, to take responsibility in the lives, or rather the future of their children. There's a question also that comes from Lizwi Njani, who says, what kind of society is inclusive practically? And what are some of the pointers that we can use to determine that we have reached or are on our way to reaching this inclusive Africa? So my understanding of this question is, what are some of the key pointers that will indicate to us that we are moving closer to this inclusive Africa? Wanjuhi, do you want to take that question?
Thank you very much, Paul. And that's a good question, because what are the indicators of inclusivity in Africa? And I think one of them is education, that we have quality education across board, that when I go to a public, when my children go to the public institution and when they go to the private institution, the quality is the same. When the facilities I would find in a private institution and the facilities I find in a private institution are the same, and it even beats the purpose of having a private school. My heart breaks for the health sector on this continent, and I feel very, very, very bad because I don't know about your country, but my country brings down the public health sector. It brings down the public sector to give rise to the private sector. So you find that the quality of health in our public health hospitals is just pathetic. We have 18 ICUs in Kenya, in the leading public hospital in Kenya. It's a referral hospital. It's called Kenyatta National Hospital. But only 5 are working. The rest are broken down. So when I think about an inclusive Africa, and the key indicators is whether you're poor or rich, you get equal access to quality services across board. And that for me is the future. I want to wake up and be able to go to a public hospital. I want to see my house help waking up and going to, and I'll give you a good example. My house help fell ill, so I have a day bug, and she fell ill. And when she went to a public institution, they looked at her and they said, you have malaria. And then when she called me and told me she could not report to work, I said, what did they diagnose you with? They said they have malaria. I said, did they take your blood test? She said, no. And so how did they know that you have malaria? And when she went to a private hospital, which was very, very expensive, she had no malaria after the test was done. She had something else. And that kind of negligence for me kills me. And that shows you how unequal we are. So you find right now that the rich children are going to school, they are learning via Zoom, but the poor children are not going to school. They have to wait for COVID to go away so that they can resume school. When I go home, we have no access to network coverage because I'm part of the forgotten child. When you go to Northern Kenya, they have no access to roads. The first CS was done about 3 years ago. The first cesarean section in 2018. I mean, we should be angry. And these are the indicators of an unequal society. How do we treat the rich versus the poor? Can I wake up one morning and go to courts and seek justice and find justice because I am a Kenyan, I am South African, I am Congolese? Is that possible? And I think when these key things are working, then we will stand up and say we have a just world. When my child is born in a public hospital, goes to public schools and gets quality services from this institution, when I don't have to bribe to get access to justice, I think that day we will stand up and we will say we are living in a just world.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Wanjuhi. Another question that just came forth that I'm going to direct to you, Inga. It comes from Kawe Sosibo. He or she says, given the failure of the OAU being the watchdog on accountability and transparency, and not referring matters to the ICC, how can we hold our leaders accountable as citizens on the ground? The ballot seems not to work. Voters are often intimidated or bribed with food parcels. So Kawe basically wants to know, how do we get our leaders arrested or held accountable?
That is such a difficult question to answer. I think there's consensus in terms of how ineffective the African Union is. We all concede to that. We understand that it's not a platform that caters for the needs of Africans in its entirety. But then to say that we can't even take the matters to the ICC is also another complication, because the ICC on its own, we know that in the matters that have been heard before the ICC, who show up in the ICC are mainly from are never held accountable leaders. So perhaps this is a platform where we can start reimagining which platforms could be effective in holding leaders accountable. If we say that the ballot is not assisting in this regard, how then do we imagine holding the leaders accountable? It's a difficult question to ask. And to be honest, for as long as there are public interest organizations, there are activists, there are oppositions in parliament. We hope these are some of the mechanisms to go about doing so. To the extent that those fail, then we need to rethink perhaps even just the voting system in countries. We need to rethink just the structure in its entire self. I'm sorry that I couldn't provide an answer to that question, but also it just means that we need to all go to the drawing board if we see that, you know, current systems aren't working.
Oh, fantastic. So still on the issue of transparency and accountability, Thembelihle says, for purposes of collaboration, transparency and collaboration, okay, so that's a repetitive word, how do we seek out these bodies representing young people, such as the Southern Africa Youth Forum, therefore making them transparent and also making it easier to hold them accountable as well? So I'll put that on the floor. Does anybody want to take that question on? So Andrew, you can go ahead.
I can see Jordan has raised his hand. Maybe he can answer first and I can contribute.
Okay. Jordan, please take it.
Talking about accountability, and before we speak about the accountability of the young people, as the question was announced, I just want to add something on what Inga was trying to answer, and she's claimed that unfortunately she could not give the answer. The problem with Africa is the copy and paste exercise that we often do in our countries. And speaking about democracy, until Africa defines its own rule of democracy, that is when we can call about accountabilities and transparencies, because the rule will be set by us according to our realities on the ground. And going to the youth that should be accountable, everything in Africa is politicized. And people get voted overnight, or people get chosen overnight. In around a Braai event, a small group of people decide who will be elected. So in the morning when we wake up and go to the boiling vote, we're just fulfilling their purposes, because we get intimidated and bribed way before. Phone call, you receive a phone call to tell you who to vote. And you don't have a nerve to ask, why are you asking me to vote this particular person? But just because we are affiliated by some personal or friendship relationship, that make you to tell me who to vote. Those people are not accountable to us voters. They are accountable to their masters, the people who brought them there. That is the problem, and that is very dangerous if we don't take these things, this matter into our own hand. Who are we voting, and why are we voting them? Those are the questions that each and every young person, whenever the voting turn comes, must be asking. Because now, everyone is quiet. We are all concerned about fighting COVID-19. When election comes, you will see them calling you. But when the relief fund for COVID-19 is coming out of the pocket, some people are getting richer out of our misery. But who's accountable? No one. Because the law and the judiciary system is built to their favor. They know the porthole of the law for them to get out with their crime. Mm. We have to go back to the basics, guys. That is important. We have to go back to the basics. The basis is to see what is not working and revisit it, a thorough revisitation of our staff policy that have been failing us completely. And that was my input about that.
Fantastic. So another comment that's still on accountability that has been made in the chat group from Kawe says that the failure of the OAU and the current impotence of the African Union is mostly due to their own reliance of the principle of external sovereignty. As a result, corrupt African leaders cannot be held accountable by peers because intervening in another African country will supposedly undermine that country's independence. So that's a comment from Kawe. Just one more question from the chat room from Lamuli, who asked what specific campaigns, I know that Inga had made mention of the fees must fall. Jordan, you had mentioned the data must fall movement as well, but outside of those, what campaigns could we start based on Agenda 2063 aspirations and drive them as young people to get these implemented?
So what campaigns can we do? First is creating awareness, and there's a bit of noise. So first is creating awareness of the Agenda 2063. We have to make, I would love to see Agenda 2063 discussed in our universities. I grew up in the 90s when student leadership in my country was a thing. So I grew up under the leadership of Daniel Arap Moi, who was a dictator. And I loved to see student leaders standing up against the leadership of Daniel Moi. And I have a desire, when I started reading about the Agenda 2063, I hoped, and this is the first draft, I hoped I would see university students exposed to Agenda 2063 to just familiarize themselves with Agenda 2063, to punch holes into it, because this is our agenda. To be honest, we are the people who will implement it. We are the ones who will make it a reality. So I hope that we can involve young people more, and this then speaks to inclusivity. If I went to the leading university in Kenya, which is my alma mater, University of Nairobi, I don't think they even understand, they even know that Agenda 2063 exists. And my desire would be to see young people first understanding, because when they understand, they will punch holes, they will also hold their governments accountable. You know, we will ask my government, what are you doing about silencing the guns? We were supposed to silence the gun by 2020. The other thing we want to do is phase out the farming hoe, which is still in existence. I'm a big champion of climate change. My business is around climate change. But when I go home, I still find the sprinkler. And it's still part of the Agenda 2063. Why haven't we phased out the hoe? Why haven't we adopted modern ways of farming to improve our yields? But when we as young people are familiar with what Agenda 2063 stands for, then we will hold our governments accountable. And unless we who are 70% are part of it, I don't think we're going to go forward. And allow me to quickly speak about leadership of young people. And when I see organizations that want to fight for young people not being respected, I feel bad. And I wish we as young people across the globe, we are 3.5 billion and maybe and above. And imagine if we realize the power that we possessed inside. How much power, it would be a revolution, it would cause a revolution, and nobody would hold us at ransom. But no, we are the ones who are paid little money to go and cause trouble, to go and wreak havoc. We are paid a few pesos here and there, and we voted people who do not even have our interests at heart. Right now, we have quite a number of young parliamentarians, and they're brilliant. They were extremely brilliant before they went to parliament, but now they do not even stand for what is right. They do not even fight for us. They are paid a few shillings here and there, and they keep quiet. The master tells them, jump. They ask how high. But we need young people who are who have the interest of the people at heart. And I think my heart desires that, and JCR is a good platform where we can channel this. I know some of us on this platform are global shapers as well. We have another platform that has grassroots reach that we can utilize to champion change and inclusivity as well. But I feel that university students ought to be part of the understanding of Agenda 2063.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I will now stop with the questions from the chat room, but I do want to encourage the young people that are in attendance here tonight to continue the conversation online on social media. On your screens right now are the different hashtags to use when you do so. So before I allow the panelists in literally 30 seconds to give us their closing comments, I'm just going to read a little passage from the Agenda 2063 document. And it says, Agenda 2063 will not happen spontaneously. It will require conscious and deliberate efforts to nurture a transformative leadership that will drive the agenda and defend Africa's interests. In closing, each of the panelists, 30 seconds maximum, because we are out of time. What do you believe, specifically with the young people that are tuning in tonight and those that will later watch this webinar, how can they individually take responsibility and become custodians of Agenda 2063? 30 seconds, we are starting with you, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Pearl, and thank you to all our participants. And I just want to say the engagement or the dialogue about Agenda 2063 must not only start with education, with higher education people or communities. It must start even with our primary school learners. Let them embrace it. By the time that they embrace it, they will be able to translate this agenda into valuable action. And that is what I want everyone to take tonight, is what is next. Go on the internet, find the agenda, start familiarizing yourself with the agenda. And when we will come for the second webinar next month, you will have something to bring on the table, and we will be able also to speak about it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Wanjihu, 30 seconds.
I think first and foremost is to accept that we have problems. And second of all is to look at those problems as huge opportunities that can create employment for all of us. I'm a firm believer in the fourth industrial revolution. I know some people disagree, but I am a firm believer. But I look at the fourth industrial revolution. For me, fourth industrial revolution means putting people at the heart of technology. Technology should respond to me and not the other way around. I should not be responding to technology. And I think the future belongs to the people who will be able to link humans to technology. I think finding that will be a beautiful thing. And so my challenge to young people is find the challenge and let us create the solutions. Let us not just complain. Let us not be gullible, because there is a lot of opportunity. We have power, a lot of power, immense power, and I hope we appreciate that we have this power and hold our governments accountable. Let us also stand up and take up leadership positions. Let us go and run for political seats. I am also telling myself that I need to run in the next general election, but let us run for political seats, because it is in parliament that laws are passed, that laws, and unless we are in there, we will continue to have a lot of bullshit in terms of leadership. So let us take up leadership positions. Let us start from the least to the highest. And I believe we can change Africa. And I believe in young people. The young people give me hope and reason to believe.
Fantastic. Inga, please challenge the young people that are watching you right now. How can they become custodians of Agenda 2063? 30 seconds.
Wow. I think Wanjihu has stated it very explicitly that we need to take up space, and you have my full support for running for public office. We're backing you all the way. I think it's important that we need to all start to act radically in order to transform spaces. I think young people should know their rights. I think it's pivotal that young people just use the law as a tool to create change. I think that's how we're going to go about bringing the change that we want to see in the world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the panelists. I also would like to extend gratitude to the JCI Sandton leadership for allowing me this platform to moderate this beautiful, beautiful conversation. I will be handing over to Bongiwe Beja right now. And before I do that, I'm going to be a bit biased and actually quote someone who I believe is one of the greatest Pan-Africanists. I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me. He was the first Prime Minister and President of Ghana, and Kwame Nkrumah, and he said, Africa must unite now. Africa must neither look east or west. Africa must instead look forward. And I believe that our panelists tonight pretty much summed that quote very beautifully in the knowledge and the insights that they've shared with us. Bongiwe, over to you.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much to our esteemed moderator, Pearl, and to all our speakers, Wanjui, Jordan, Inga. You know, it's one thing to have a vision, to bring together young active citizens, to bring some light on a conversation that is so pertinent for young people across the continent. It's another thing to actually have the debate and the discussion. I think when we launched this project as JCI Sandton, we never imagined that the insights that we'd get from holding or convening a discussion like this would be of such power, of such relevance. And so with a real humble heart and true gratitude, we'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you for contributing to this debate. You know, we have the hashtags that were relevant for tonight being the Africa We Want, Agenda 2063, but more importantly, a youth-led conversation. And so for each person that's here tonight, I'd like to congratulate you for contributing towards a youth-led conversation. Agenda 2063 should be the agenda that youth want, because as our speakers have shared tonight, Africa has got one of the youngest youth bulge as a continent and in fact across the world. The median age, depending on what study you read, is between 18 and 20. And so I truly believe that the Africa we want needs to be the Africa youth want. And so pat yourselves on the back. You've contributed to shaping the narrative and indeed asking the right questions that we need to ask in terms of building the Africa we want. As JCI Sandton, the details are on the screen right now. You can engage with us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on YouTube. And this is the first of 4 seminars. Our idea is to convene even a larger crowd of young active citizens across the continent. And I do believe tonight we've got representation of East Africa, South Africa, North Africa, West Africa. And so I thank you for all joining from all corners of our continent. But really, what I want to tell you is that in the month of July, we'll have yet another discussion that will focus on another aspiration. In August, we'll have another discussion that will focus on yet another aspiration of the Africa we want and the Agenda 2063. And this culminates to a bigger conference that we'll have on Heritage Day on the 24th of September, where we want to have a conglomerate of all the conversations that we have around 3 aspirations, where we will gather a large crowd of young active citizens across the continent. And we want to table the discussions and hand them over to the African Union so that once and for all, Agenda 2063, when you read it, when you have the chance to go through the document, you can truly feel that youth have contributed to this agenda, because it is our agenda. It is ours to build, and it's also for future generations to come. And so in true JCI spirit, I'd really like to say thank you. Thank you for joining. Please look out for our emails. We will be sending out absolutely every single attendee an email to tell you when the next webinar is. We are trying to get into the rhythm of the last Thursday of every month, just in case you forget the dates, but we will continue this pertinent conversation. But mine tonight as Vice President Projects of JCI Sandton 2020 is to say thank you, and you are the Africa we want. You are part of that conversation. We want you as part of that conversation, and so please continue to engage with us. Thank you all.